All right, so you love staying informed, right? You want to know what's happening with the games you care about, but, you don't have endless hours to scroll through forums and watch every single video. And that is exactly why we do these deep dives.
Yep.
Today we're talking about something pretty destructive.
Oh, yeah.
Wreckfest 2.
Wreckfest 2.
The sequel to the game that I think, honestly, even now, years after it came out, still feels like a breath of fresh air.
It really does.
Just pure fun, unadulterated chaos and destruction.
In a gaming landscape that's so often dominated by really serious, meticulous, games that are very realistic and kind of have these big, important narratives, I think sometimes it's just nice to kind of just blow things up.
Yeah, absolutely. And to understand exactly where Wreckfest 2 is right now, we've looked at two main things. There was the initial announcement that came out, laying out the core details.
Right.
But also a hands-on early access review to see, what are those initial impressions.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission today, basically, is to give you the essential need-to-know information about Wreckfest 2 as it stands right now. So what is actually available to play? What can we kind of see on the horizon in terms of what they're going to add?
Right.
And crucially, is this something, as it stands, worth checking out?
So you can get a really good understanding of where this game is in, its development cycle.
Without having to read all the articles yourself.
Exactly, without doing any of the legwork. Yeah.
So Wreckfest 2 is out right now in early access, but this is important. The announcement very clearly states that this is very, very early days.
Wow.
I think the words primitive and limited were actually used.
Yeah.
So if you're expecting a fully fledged sequel, it sounds like we need to maybe temper those expectations a little.
And I think that's something that we see a lot with early access, right?
Yeah.
It means a lot of different things depending on the game and the developer's approach.
Right.
But in this case, it really does seem like they've gone with, let's get the absolute core of this game in a playable state, get some feedback on that, and then build on top of it.
Yeah, so what can you actually play? Well, if we look at the game modes, it's pretty basic stuff. You got quick race, you got multiplayer, and then there's a create an event option. So enough to get you started, get you smashing, but certainly not the extensive range of options that some people might have been hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, those are the essentials, right? The absolute core loop of the game experience.
Yeah.
You can either jump into a quick race, by yourself against AI, or you can test your skills against other players. The create an event, I imagine, probably gives you some degree of control over, parameters of the match, stuff like that. But it's the core loop presented in, as you said, a pretty basic structure at this stage.
And the cars. Well, there are four. You got the Road Slayer, the Rocket, the Striker, and the Ginger.
Okay.
Now, again, a very small starting selection.
Yeah.
What do you think that tells us at this point?
Well, I think that probably indicates a real focus on refining the core vehicle physics and, damage models for a smaller set of cars.
Right.
So they can really kind of concentrate their efforts there, make sure those feel really good, and then expand the roster later. It's kind of a trade-off. You get less variety, but you get a potentially more polished core experience.
And in terms of where you're going to be doing this smashing and crashing, the tracks include Scrapyard, Speedway,
Okay, familiar.
Savalax Sandpit,
Yeah.
and a new one called Testing Grounds. Interestingly, even at this early stage, these tracks do feature environmental hazards and opportunities for, chaos. So the jumps, the obstacles, that stuff is still very much part of the fun.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually really significant, right? To have that kind of stuff in there straight away. Because, it shows that the DNA of Wreckfest is there in this early build.
Yeah.
It's not just straight up racing or, basic destruction. It's that mix of the two, the environmental hazards, the track design, all that kind of feeds into that fun. So, and having that variety in the track environments, you got your enclosed arenas, you got more open circuits, it should offer some initial diversity to the way the game plays as well.
For those of you out there who love to, customize and tune your rides, the options are, shall we say, very limited.
Okay.
The announcement basically just says, very basic, paint editor. That's it. No upgrades for armor, no performance tuning, and sadly, no sign of those really kind of crazy over-the-top cosmetic items that we all loved.
Shark fin.
Yeah, well, they're hopeful that the giant shark might make a comeback.
Fingers crossed.
But at this point, just a basic paint editor.
I mean, that is fairly typical of an early access release, though, right?
Yeah.
It's all about priorities, right?
Yeah.
They're focusing on that core gameplay loop, stability, making sure all the fundamentals are there and working as they should before they start to pile on those more complex features.
Right.
Having even that basic paint editor, though, does suggest that, they understand that people like to personalize their vehicles. So I think it's a good sign that, more advanced options are probably on their roadmap.
For those of you who like a bit more structure to your smashing, the good news is they have confirmed that they are planning to bring back many of the game modes from the original. So, most importantly, a proper career mode, which would include the demolition derbies and the races.
Yeah, which I think is a big deal for a lot of players.
Yeah.
That sense of progression.
Right.
You've got your goals, your targets, the rewards for hitting those goals, and I think, knowing that's coming will give some people reassurance.
Absolutely.
Because, the content is a little bit sparse right now.
Yeah.
But knowing that, full, proper career mode's coming, I think that's good.
And in terms of customization, yes, they are going to be adding the armor upgrades, performance upgrades, and hopefully those cosmetic items that we all loved.
Right.
And they are going to be improving that basic paint editor. So laying the groundwork and then building on it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of the typical approach with early access is you get the foundation in place and then you gradually expand the feature set based on, feedback from players, but also just, internal development progress as well.
Yeah.
And having that, the promise of those enhanced customization options and a more robust paint editor I think is going to be really key to keep people engaged, give people a richer experience as the game, continues to grow.
Now, for our console players out there, Wreckfest 2 is confirmed for PlayStation 5 and Xbox.
Okay.
However, don't expect to see it hit your console anytime during this initial early access phase.
Right.
The Switch is a bit of an unknown. The original did come out on the Switch, but so far there's been no firm commitment to a sequel. Although there has been some talk, speculatively, about whether maybe it will come out on the Switch too, assuming such a thing exists.
Right.
But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, that PS5 and Xbox confirmation is great for a huge chunk of the gaming audience, right?
Absolutely.
But I think it makes sense to focus on the PC during this early access.
Yeah.
It just lets them, iterate on, refine the game in a more controlled environment before dealing with, all the complexities of console-specific development.
Right.
I think the uncertainty around the Switch is probably reflective of, we're in a bit of a weird time with Nintendo hardware right now.
Yeah.
But, the fact that the original did pretty well on that platform suggests that it's, not out of the question.
Yeah. And of course, the big question, will Wreckfest 2 be on subscription services, Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, etc.?
Yeah, that's a big one.
We don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see how that develops.
I mean, I think those services have had a huge impact, haven't they, on certain games?
Yeah.
In terms of their visibility.
Absolutely.
And the number of people that actually get to play them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's something that people will definitely be keeping an eye on.
Okay, so you want to jump into this early access version.
Yeah.
Here are the specs.
Okay.
It is worth noting that this is very early, and these could well change.
Right.
Minimum specs, Windows 10 or 11, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 15 gigabytes of storage space available. Interestingly, for both the minimum and the recommended specs, the processor and the graphics card are TBD.
Really?
TBD. What do you think we can read into that?
I mean, it suggests, doesn't it, that the optimization process is still ongoing.
Right.
And that they don't really, they haven't settled on what they want the target to be yet.
Right.
It's a little bit early. However, I think that 16 gigabyte RAM requirement is interesting.
Right.
Even at this early stage.
Yeah.
It tells us that they are aiming for, a certain level of visual fidelity and complexity.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of an indication of the target hardware tier.
And the recommended specs mirror the minimum.
Right.
So same OS, same RAM, same storage, but again, processor, graphics card TBD. So we don't have specifics yet, but that consistent RAM requirement does give us an idea of, where they're aiming.
It is a bit unusual, though, isn't it, that there isn't at least some placeholder?
Yeah, it's a little odd, and I think it just reinforces the idea that this is a very early build. They don't want to give people potentially misleading information based on, an unoptimized build.
Yeah.
I think as development progresses, we'll see those TBDs filled in.
Absolutely.
But it is something to watch out for. if you're thinking about jumping into early access.
Let's talk about those early impressions.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Let's get behind the wheel.
Yeah.
So, first thing that stood out to the reviewer was the handling model.
Which is being described as solid. It's hitting that sweet spot that I think made the original so enjoyable, that nice balance between arcade and realism.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they've actually added a little bit more depth this time around, because the reviewer was noting slightly more realistic weight transfer and noticeable differences between, different drivetrain types. But the bottom line is it's still very approachable.
Okay, good.
It's fun to get to grips with. It's easy to pick up.
That's reassuring, yeah. That's a key point, isn't it? It's about that balance. You want to have that sort of pick up and play immediate fun factor.
Yeah.
But then, for more dedicated players, having that hint of additional realism, with the weight transfer,
Right.
that could be really interesting.
Yeah.
It potentially could raise the skill ceiling for those more competitive players without sacrificing that, immediate gratification that everyone loves.
Yeah. Visually, it sounds like the game is making a good first impression. It looks great, according to the reviewer. Specifically, they called out things like the way that light bounces off the cars, those beautifully dented and crumpled car surfaces.
Yeah.
They like the way that the destructible trackside objects are integrated and look when they fall apart and break. And the damage modeling, although it's not entirely realistic, it's still impressive. What does that tell you about where they're headed with the graphics?
I think, it's clear that, visual fidelity is something that they're, focusing on.
Right.
And I think the description of the, dynamic lighting, that detailed destruction, it paints a picture of a very visually engaging experience.
Yeah.
Even at this stage. And, while perfect simulation might not be their primary goal, I think in a game like Wreckfest, convincing, visually satisfying destruction is absolutely crucial, right? It's got to feel impactful. It's got to feel exciting to watch.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they're hitting that mark.
Now, performance-wise, the reviewer was running a pretty beefy PC.
Oh, yeah.
An NVIDIA RTX 4080 Super.
Okay.
And was seeing a constant 100+ frames per second on max settings with a full grid of cars.
Oh, wow.
So very, very good performance. They did acknowledge that it is, a very high-end PC.
Right.
But they didn't seem to have any major concerns about optimization at this early stage.
Well, that's good to hear, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's always nice to see a game running well on, high-end hardware, but, we have to remember early access builds can sometimes be less optimized than the final product.
Yeah.
I think the real test will come when more players, with a wider range of PCs
Yeah.
get their hands on it. But I think it's encouraging, to see such strong performance on that kind of setup. It suggests that the underlying engine is capable.
Right.
And hopefully that bodes well for optimization, across more sort of mainstream hardware.
And so, of course, the most important question, is it fun?
Yeah, is it fun?
And the initial impressions seem to be a resounding yes. That core gameplay loop, that kind of, destruction, heavy action, is still as refreshing and enjoyable as ever. Just jump into a quick race and start smashing stuff up. It's still a really nice break from, more serious games.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, with a game like Wreckfest, that's what it's all about. It's got to be fun. And the fact that it's remaining engaging,
Yeah.
even in this, limited form, is a good sign, right?
Yeah.
It means that they've managed to capture the essence of what made the original great. And they can build on that foundation,
Yeah.
as they move forward.
One of the new things that the reviewer called out was a new track called Testing Grounds.
Okay.
And this is inspired by Beamonji's grid map.
Right.
So think of it as this big open sandbox filled with jumps, loops, things to smash into, even car flippers. And the reviewer suggested that, once they add in more cars, more game modes, this could be a real standout feature.
Okay.
That could lead to some really spectacular kind of emergent moments of chaos. For people who aren't familiar, what is the significance of something like this? What is a track like this all about?
Well, I mean, for those that, don't know beam.ng, that grid map is essentially, like a physics playground, right?
Right.
And so having something like that in Wreckfest 2 could really increase its replay value.
Yeah.
Because it's a dedicated space for players to just experiment.
Yeah.
Mess around with the physics engine, push the damage modeling to its limits, just cause general mayhem without the constraints of, a race or a demolition derby.
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to really show off, the core of the game,
Yeah.
the underlying systems. And it often leads to some really funny and really unexpected moments.
Now, should you buy this game right now?
Yeah, is it worth it?
That's the big question. Well, the reviewer's assessment is that it's too early to recommend for most players.
Right.
The limited content, it's basically just those basic quick races, the multiplayer. You got those 4 cars with no real customization, and there are no sort of in-depth game modes.
Yeah.
So they were saying that, for the majority of players, the original Wreckfest is actually a more complete and satisfying experience right now.
Yeah. It's a pretty cautious recommendation, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
But I think it's, when it comes to early access, I think honesty is really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
And at the moment, it sounds like while the core gameplay is good and there's potential there, the lack of content means that the experience is probably going to be quite short-lived
Right.
for a lot of people. So, recommending the original makes sense for the average gamer.
Yeah. However, there is a caveat to that.
Okay.
If you are absolutely certain you want Wreckfest 2, eventually.
Right.
It's 20% off right now for the first 2 weeks.
Yep.
It's normally £24.99, so with that 20% off, that might sway some people. But I think the general consensus is if you're not absolutely certain you want it, hold off for now, wait for some more media updates.
Yeah, it's kind of that classic early adopter dilemma, isn't
Yeah.
it? You get a bit of a discount, you get to be there, right at the beginning. You can, potentially provide feedback, shape the development.
Right.
But for the average player who wants a, more complete game, yeah, I think holding off, waiting to see what they add, getting a clearer picture of that final product, that probably is the smarter approach.
So to recap, Wreckfest, 2 very early days.
Yeah.
It's very basic, limited game modes, limited vehicles, barely any customization. However, that core, destructive fun is present and accounted for, and it is the very nice looking game.
Mm-hmm.
More features are planned, including a proper career mode, more customization. It will be coming to consoles. But right now, most of us should probably just keep an eye on it and wait. Unless you desperately need to play it right now.
Yeah, it's one to watch, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Keep an eye on those updates as they start rolling in.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to consider. What is it that makes a destruction derby game truly great?
Yeah.
Is it the sheer number of cars?
Yeah.
Is it the customization?
The depth of the customization.
Is it just that pure kind of chaos of crashing into
a
things?
crunch of metal?
Yeah, think about what aspects really resonate with you, and
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
see how Wreckfest 2 develops. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.